Welcome to the Who Is This Crazy Hag podcast. We're up to episode 14 and you're still here. It's great to know that you are out there listening all over the world and that 95% of you are women. Girl power. From Europe to the Americas, all the way to Australia and even Asia, all places I have travelled in the past and hope to again in the future. This week, we're travelling back in time to London in the early 90s. It was wild. On one hand, the party scene was in full swing and we all worked hard and played harder. On the other hand, the IRA was planting random bombs all over the city and we never knew when or where the next explosion would go off. We lived on the razor edge of life and death, never knowing if we would survive the day. When the Baltic Exchange bomb went off in the centre of the city, it shook the house where we lived in Bayswater. We'd just finished dinner and were settling in to watch a movie when we heard the boom and all the glasses and plates in the cabinets shook. We ditched the movie to turn on the TV and listen to the news to find out what had happened. It was the biggest bomb that had been detonated in London since World War II. After discussing this event amongst ourselves for a while, we turned the movie back on, and towards the end, another explosion rocked the house. This would have been maybe 4 hours after the first one. That one came from a different direction. This is why we partied so hard, because we didn't know if we'd still be alive tomorrow. Let me tell you a little bit about the house where I lived in. So there was a widow who had lost her husband to some kind of disease, and they had this enormous house, and it had like 10 or 11 bedrooms in it. So instead of selling the house, she turned it into a boarding house, and it was 3 floors. And there were 3 or 4 bedrooms on each floor. And so each bedroom shared a bathroom on that same floor, and she rented it out to young people like me who were travelling and working, and semi-responsible but kind of crazy people filled that house. And I lived there for quite a while. It was a great place to live in London. Anyway, let's get on with the story. The shout-outs this week go to all the characters in this story, to Brett, to Stacey, to Tom, Sean, and of course, the Australian icon, Jimmy Barnes. It wouldn't be an Australian party without him. If your ideal vacation includes lounging in hammocks and reading books, Secret Garden could be the perfect spot for you. From observing iguanas to watching hummingbirds, picking fresh tropical fruit from the garden, and walking to the beach, you can do as little or as much as you like. Secret Garden is an eco-house where you can get away from it all and truly relax. Make your booking on Instagram or Facebook at Secret Garden Mompiche. The links are in the show notes. Use the code WITCHPOD for a 20% discount on a 6-day stay. This story takes place in London, England, and it's called Get Dressed, We're Going to Church. I'm sure some of you know how important it is to go to church. In London, in the early 90s, the club scene was huge. Weekends were all about partying until the sun came up. We were young, fun, and full of ourselves. The tragedy took place on a Sunday morning. It was around 10:30. Way too early for a wannabe alcoholic with a vicious hangover to be awake. My head pounded as if the Beefeaters brass band was marching around inside my skull, pounding their drums at double time. A raucous night beginning in Leicester Square and spilling through the darkened alleys of Soho with the gang was more than my fragile brain cells could stand. The stereo in Brett's room blasted Twisted Sister at a rate of insanely high decibels. The booming drumbeat rumbled up the walls, preparing to crack the ceiling. Groaning, I crawled out of bed in protest. "Rise and shine," shouted Brett as I crawled into his room on hands and knees. "Sod off, turn the music down," I growled, my point sharply made. I hauled my nauseous body back towards my bedroom. Sleep was on the agenda. Lots and lots of sleep. "Come on, get dressed. We're going to church," Brett yelled. He said he didn't yell, but I distinctly heard raised tones. The sound of his voice bounced and echoed off the few remaining brain cells still able to swim in the vodka stew that permeated my intoxicated grey matter. "Church? Today? You've got to be kidding." Even if I could manage to stand upright and haul myself to King's Cross, I was incapable of getting out alive. Despite my reluctance to appear in public, a hair of the dog beckoned. In the tube, a group of giggling Australian girls in short shorts and barely there bikini tops made fake announcements throughout the carriage. "There will be no smiling on the Underground. Underground Smile Police will issue £5 on-the-spot fines to anyone caught with their cheeks apart." And my personal favourite, Gap the Mind. So the tube is the underground train, the subway that runs around London, and Mind the Gap is the common call of the announcers so that you don't fall down the space between the platform and the train when you're getting on. Anyone who has ever lived in London knows taking the piss out of the Poms is a full-time occupation never to be taken lightly. Poms is the Australian slang word for English people. The Underground was a grim British institution that needed serious brightening up. Collectively, we did our best. At King's Cross Station, the train spewed out thousands of motley backpackers, New Age travellers, scruffy foreign wannabe residents, and hungover expats like myself. They were mostly fun-loving Antipodeans and a few in-tune South Africans who had heard the rumours. Everyone was headed to church that bright, sunny Sunday morning. The respectably grey-suited English stayed neatly in their carriages, peering sternly over newspapers at the colourful ragtag army of rowdy tatterdemalions spilling into the platform. Relief washed over bland white faces as we poured out the exits. Brett generously gave everyone a close look at the extended middle finger on his right hand as the train sped away. Stacey and Tom dragged me up the elevators, my poor head thudding vehemently, protesting all the way. Out in the street, bright sunshine blinded me. Even after a year in the grand metropolis, I never got used to sunny days in London. The sun never shines in London. When it comes out, it's a freaking miracle. They were rare, hence our weekly trip to church, where we worshipped the sun gods and expressed eternal gratitude for each gloriously fine day they benevolently bestowed upon us. It was a ritualistic ceremony. Every Sunday morning, rain, hail or shine, hundreds of the unclean, un-British gathered in droves in a quiet lane in King's Cross to thank the Great Spirit for her blessings. On rare sunny days, we gave special thanks. On more frequent dreary rainy days, we pleaded forgiveness and begged for one more day of warmth and sunshine before the bleak winter set in. Tom and Stacey led us past a row of smelly industrial bins and truck-sized loading zones to the centre of the devoted masses. The hum of 1,000 shouted pickup lines and the muffled roar of a kick-ass sound system pumping out Jimmy and the boys howling K-San reached our ears. So back in those days, Jimmy Barnes and his band Cold Chisel were extremely popular. You can Google Cold Chisel and Jimmy Barnes and check out their history. It's very interesting. As we rounded the corner into the alley, we were confronted with frightful scenes of reckless debauchery and uninhibited vice. Stepping carefully over drunken couples snogging lustfully on the pavement, we navigated the dark stairs into the cavernous dungeon of worship. The huge hall heaved, loud rock music screaming out into a pulsating mass of sweaty bodies. Antipodean anthems ruled. In the community spirit of ecclesiastical debauchery, we promptly abandoned ourselves to the mutual decadence. The sign above the door read, "The Church, get into the habit." Another sign chalked onto a blackboard at the bottom of the stairs warned, "If you are easily offended, don't enjoy having fun, are a train spotter, or don't party hard, you're in the wrong place." The sign next to that announced, "Aussie Happy Hour, 2 to 3, Foster cans, £1. Kiwi Happy Hour, 3 to 4, Steinlager cans, £1. South African Happy Hour, 1 to 2, Castle Lager cans, £1. We were definitely in the right place. The church had been an Australian and New Zealand institution in London since 1979. The cult was born with heady beginnings at the Golden Lion in Fulham Broadway, where fresh-faced acts such as Paul Young, Annie Lennox, and Elvis Costello had once performed. Quiet Sunday sessions were attended by a few hardcore Aussies and Kiwis who gathered to check out the stripper, the only entertainment back in the good old days. It was the conception of an empire. Gradually, the grapevine grew, and Aussie and Kiwi travellers dedicated to Sunday drinking sessions flocked to the church. High priest Sean Sullivan, the church's astute manager, hired a comedian, and decades of decadence began. By word of mouth, the faithful flock grew. The church resurrected itself in various locations around London half a dozen times. As its growing congregation of faithful disciples ritually cleansed their sins with icy cold beer, decadent fun, and ear-piercingly loud music, local council got antsy and decreed this newfangled religion was better off practiced elsewhere. The church finally settled comfortably into an old warehouse known as Bagley's in King's Cross. This place was massive. You could fit thousands of people inside it. Thousands of travellers from Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa came religiously to purge the demon of daily life in London from their wanton bodies every week. It was a not-so-secret Antipodean haven where we could go to have a ton of harmless fun and get thoroughly pissed in a country far removed from the sun-drenched shores of home without the hassle of drugs or violence. The church was devoted to fun and games, partying, and the odd slightly deviant activity. Stacey, Tom, Brett and I were all for it. Tom and Brett spruced up a little, making an effort to look halfway decent so they might have a chance to get laid by some tastefully lithe young thing with an IQ matching her shoe size. Casual and uncomplicated love entanglements were the specialty of the house. Despite appearances, Stacey and I couldn't have cared less about being crammed into the warehouse with hundreds of nubile young men with angelic faces, golden tans, and bulging muscles that had to be seen to be believed, as trickles of shiny sweat glistened on bare pectorals. The church always produced an abundant crop of tasty treats in sexy denim cut-offs. Bearing this in mind, we were dressed to get wet. A small group of determined travellers with a lifetime of world travel experience, we upheld the sacred principle that people cannot be forgiven unless they have sinned. Soon after we arrived and filled our hands with glorious icy-cold amber liquid of faithful devotion and worship, the action began. The church was the only place in London which tolerated Antipodean revelry at its wildest. However, anyone who became violent was instantly thrown out on their ear. It didn't happen often. This is quite surprising, actually. The church was very well regulated. A comedian dominated the stage, his hoarse voice booming over thousands of shrieking disciples. Using an incomparable mix of intelligent wit, toilet humour, and whimsical satire, the prophet tamed the worshippers long enough to introduce the first stripper. As she peeled off her leather skirt and lacy blouse, Stacy and I retreated to the back of the room to refill our palms. Beer flowed, uninhibited nudity abounded, and the queue for the toilet was horrendous. At least 100 jiggling girls stood desperately waiting to pee. The occasional groan, followed by a curse, burst from the cubicle of some unsuspecting newbie who hadn't the foresight to bring her own bum tickets. In Australian slang, bum tickets is toilet paper. Sometimes the queue was so long we ducked into the back alley and took our chances. I remember my friend Michelle throwing her skirt over her head while she was peeing so that nobody would recognize her face. Meanwhile, everything at the bottom was all just hanging out. Plunging back into the foray, we passed hundreds of beer-fueled revelers, tripping over each other to reach the bar and get even more rat-faced. It was a valiant effort to remain faithful to ancestral drinking traditions. Eventually, inebriated Romeos and Juliets lasciviously dragged each other away for potentially uncomplicated aerobic feats of unromantic contortions, assuming they didn't spew their guts out or pass out in the filthy sawdust on the floor. As romantic as stale pizza, Tom and Brett always resorted to their tried and trusted Tarzan and Jane guys. Romeos they were not. Brett was notorious for his famous feral dance routine in the middle of any crowd, as he writhed and squirmed around the dance floor like a demented love cat. Some pretty moron always fell for it. In this respect, the church catered well to the raw animalist needs of its predominantly Antipodean clientele. We arrived back at the stage area in time to see the regurgitator. Of all the bizarre acts we witnessed at the church, this guy was arguably one of the most disgusting. He swallowed all kinds of stuff, including live goldfish, light bulbs, whole fruit, and coins. Then he would pulsate his stomach and regurgitate each item in the order someone shouting from the audience requested. Heralded as one of the chosen few, the regurgitator ruthlessly entertained the drunken mob every Sunday and earned their gruesome adoration. He was one prophet in whose footsteps I would not follow. Stacy loved him. I must admit, he was kind of cute in a strange kind of way, but just the thought of kissing him made me nauseous. The congregation begged for more. The infamous shrine to hardcore partying let them have it. I sometimes wondered if it had been the brightest idea on the planet to travel halfway around the world to hang out with a rowdy bunch of half-cut Australians. The church was the best place to go in London for those suffering homesickness and desperately wanting to hear their own familiar grating, twanging accent. That day I had been kidnapped by flatmates and was dragged away, kicking and screaming, through the streets to attend our ritual Sunday ceremony. Normally, I was a dedicated party animal, but after the previous night's overindulgence, I just didn't feel good. Brett and Tom insisted I come along. For pure entertainment value, the church was hard to beat. The debauchery usually kicked off around noon and finished late afternoon when everyone went home with whoever had tickled their fancy, or, for some, whoever happened to be standing beside them at closing time. In between rampant beer guzzling, cheering the floor shows, ogling the strippers, and crawling over each other in the race to get laid. My first memory of the church was of a reeking warehouse with the stench of stale smoke hanging like a bulldog's undercarriage, with a large Kiwi guy with Mum tattooed on his right bicep who pressed me up against the door in a persistent yet unsuccessful bid to turn me on. I mean, seriously, guys, really? Over the year, the place kind of grew on me, much like an incurable fungus. I liked the relaxed, broad-minded attitude and genuine hardcore partygoers atmosphere. Stacy dragged me towards the center of the room where 1,000,001 sweating bodies were jammed into 6 square meters in front of the stage. The male strippers were about to start. I mean, it was fantastic that they catered to everybody, female and male strippers. How could you ask for more? The vastness of the venue was mind-boggling. Thousands of screaming tourists gathered in one place to get shed-faced every weekend, while a team of entertainers with various talents did their best to make everyone happy. Stacy and I went there to get faceless and, of course, to see the stunning strippers. He came out dressed in a fireman's uniform. A bottle of fluorescent pink baby oil swung from a strap at his hip. Male strippers at the church had a reputation for letting it all hang out for the ladies to enjoy. Acknowledging the sermon, "Go forth and indulge," we did just that. We squeezed our way to the front of the stage and settled in to watch the show. As Black Betty pounded out of the speakers, our masked and helmeted fireman danced, twirled, and stamped around the stage, shedding his clothes. The women behind us pushed forward. Stacy and I pushed back. The male stripper was religiously cherished, worshipped, relished, and chewed every Sunday. Women swooned as he peeled off his clothes, tossing them in the air with a flourish and a sexy swing of his smooth tanned hips. Glistening muscles rippled as he poured oil down his front. The pulsating mass of panting women cheered him on and simultaneously wet their panties. He threw a bucket of cold water over the steaming audience, but failed to put the fire out. Stacy and I copped a faceful of water, and the women behind us surged forward, slathering like bitches on heat over our shoulders. Tepid beer poured down my sweaty back, and my eardrums almost burst with the piercing screams of Fireman Joe's frantic fans. He finally peeled back the black mask from his face. It was Brett. I mean, honestly, if there was a photo of my face when he took the mask off, I'm pretty sure it would be a meme today. Stacy and I stood dumbfounded while women went wild all around us. Brett undid the snaps on his bulging G-string and gyrated in a woman's face at the front of the stage. Then he tossed the flimsy garment behind him and stepped back. Grabbing hold of his penis, he swung it around. Our flatmate, Brett, the bane of my life and the world's largest pain in the ass, danced on the stage at the church, swinging his unbelievably long penis in a wide circle as if it were a towel he had just used to dry himself. The happy crowd roared with appreciation. Stacy and I stared in disbelief at his finely toned legs, ripping muscles, six-pack stomach, and his perfectly proportioned torso. His biceps bulged as he waved thanks to the audience and disappeared through a door at the back of the stage. I suddenly needed to go home. I had never seen Brett with his shirt off, much less naked, and didn't even aspire to the notion. As Stacy and I staggered out the door, drunk and bewildered, Tom caught up with us. Grinning like a Cheshire cat, It was obvious he had known well in advance about the little surprise Brett had kept up his sleeve. "So, what did you think?" he asked. What did I think? What did he think I thought? What did he expect me to think? I thought the church would never be quite the same again.
Hey there, love bugs! Welcome to the jungle! I'm Nancy Miarelli, your guide to the ecological and entomological, i.e. bug, wonders of Ecuador. With my master's in entomology and a passion for ecology and conservation, I'm here to take you on an unforgettable adventure through the mega diverse forests and more lush than you may have expected mountainsides of Ecuador. This year, I'm excited to offer 2 unique science-focused tours. Join me for a nature journaling course where we'll sit in the grass, sketch, observe, and reflect on all the creatures and plants that we discovered. Or dive deep into evolutionary theory on my evolution tour, where you'll see what you learned in a book that one time growing on the side of a tree. Ready to embark on a journey of discovery? Visit www.scibugs.info, that is Scibugs, SCIBUGS, to learn more or find me, Scibugs, everywhere on the internet. Let's explore Ecuador and all it has to offer together.
Laughing in the face of terror and in between the bomb blasts helped us live from day to day in a volatile time in history. People came and went from that boarding house in Bayswater, but that little core group were my buds, at least until Slapper came along. But he's a whole other story. Maybe I'll tell you about him someday. Next week we're heading to Greece for some naked camping on the island of Gavdos. Do you have any crazy travel stories? What's the most insane thing that happened to you while you were on the road? If you'd like to share, send an MP3 recording of your story or write it into an email and send it to thewitchmob@gmail.com, and it could feature in a future episode. Don't forget to pick up your Who Is This Crazy Hag stickers and totes from Redbubble. Links are in the show notes. The Who Is This Crazy Hag podcast is created, written, read, produced, edited, mixed and published by Ronnie. If you'd like to grab a copy of Few Are Oo, find the paperback on Amazon or email thewitchpod@gmail.com to get an ebook. Also, let us know via email or on Blue Sky at The Witch Pod if you're reading in a book club or a group of friends so we can give you a shout out. Don't forget to tell us where you are in the world. You can visit The Witch Pod on Spotify, YouTube, Amazon Music and Castbox, and also Substack and Patreon. See you next week.